Hi, it's me. That little voice inside your head. You spent all year taking care of business. Let Office Depot Office Max take care of you. There's this new HP Pavilion laptop with 8th generation Intel Core i5 processor. Save $200. Now just $449. Look at it. It's only $449 at Office Depot Office Max. Go ahead. You deserve it.
Taking care of business.
Offer ends 11/11. Limit 1.
All right, today I'm here with Eric Sidewater of B-Ball Breakdown, but more importantly of Sixer Science. At Sixer Science is his Twitter handle, and Sixer Science is a Sixers podcast, and I have said Sixers, I think, 4 times. That was the 5th, and speaking of 5th, 5-game winning streak. Eric, thanks for joining us today to talk Sixers. That's 6.
I'm glad to be on. I feel like we're hearing the theme song for the Sixers already.
Yeah, right? So tonight, the 76ers played the Utah Jazz, and we're going to be talking about the Sixers in general, but I think tonight was interesting. It was a game without Joel Embiid, but still, it was just totally striking, and I tweeted this earlier in the night. It was so striking how much more talented the 76ers were than the Jazz, and not really insofar as like shot making, because the Jazz missed a lot of open shots because they don't have the best shooters in the world, and the 76ers, I think Dario got lucky a lot, but it was all the other stuff besides whether the ball went through the hoop. And I just think the 76ers were just dominating the Jazz, which is a team that's typically pretty good at all the other stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I predicted the Jazz would come away with a 6-point victory. I kind of do a game preview where I do a prediction at the end because I just thought that they would have the advantage on the defensive end, especially, with Embiid out. I just thought Gobert would be a force we couldn't handle. And there were times where he definitely, asserted himself. He has, a wingspan that goes on forever. And we have Amir Johnson, Rashawn Holmes, and a few spot minutes at 5 for Dario Saric, and then unfortunately a few minutes for Okafor, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but they went absolutely horrible. But
he was so bad.
Yeah, so we'll just talk about that now because I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to actually put it off because I'll be dreading it. So he came in the game, and in less than 3 minutes, it might have been 2 minutes 40 game time. He came in, had a foul, which put the Utah Jazz in the penalty, then came back and had another foul the next possession. Then he was involved in a pick-and-roll turnover where he did like a short roll but was really indecisive, and it was his fault. And then he came back and he was late in a rotation to switch and gave up a corner 3 wide open.
You forgot before all of this happened, he had like a really lousy pull-up mid-range jumper.
Oh, my God.
Do you remember that?
I wish I didn't remember it, actually, now that you're bringing it up. Yeah, and then, after that horrible jumper, he came back and did his 3rd foul, all in 2 minutes 40. It was just incredible. It actually looked like he had taken the Jazz spread.
Yeah, it was not NBA caliber basketball. It looked like it was just some dude out there who just happened to be 7 feet tall. And you look back on NBA history, and it's like you got guys who are just basically the game finds them, right? They're 7-footers, so 7-footers play basketball. It's actually an interesting stat. Over 90% of 7-footers in the United States are professional basketball players. Do you know that, Eric? Anyways, he looked like one of these guys from like the 80s who just were out there because they were tall and had no discernible basketball skills. And that just doesn't work in the modern game. And I tweeted also, I just am not sympathetic towards him because he just hasn't developed any skills. He seems like super pouty, and he's got all these sob story articles about him. Like, dude, you don't deserve the whole Feds title. It's not like you've been working your ass off out there.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I've never been a Procafor, as they call it over on like Liberty Ballers and the rest of the Sixers community. Those guys pretty much have been shunned from the forums. It's hard to now. There's just a few stragglers left, but after tonight, I just can't see there being any more who can show their face. But I think at this point they realize they can't even get a second rounder for him. So it's just going to be a buyout situation. So, I mean, I would kind of just sit him down, the rest of the season. You're only going to hurt yourself. I mean, we were up, I think, 16 in the first quarter. He came in and almost single-handedly blew our lead. It was whittled down the single digits before you could blink. So it's like you can't even play him in these spot starts when Embiid is out. So it's just a scary situation, and it's unfortunate that a number 3 overall pick is going to complete waste.
Yeah, no, and I just don't think that he's going to be one of those guys. I'm not optimistic about the idea that he's going to go to a different team and pull it together. He would need to completely change his work ethic and approach to the game. Whatever, let's move on. There's one more negative thing to talk about with the 76ers we'll touch on later. It's Markelle Fultz, by the way. But really, coming off of your 5th consecutive win, the 76ers have to feel really good about how they're playing basketball right now. And with Embiid sitting out, like you said, you predicted a 6-point loss. But they came out, and their starting lineup right off the bat was JJ Redick, Covington, Simmons, Holmes, and Saric. The shortest guy out there is Redick. Everyone else is like 6'10" or above. Basically, Redick and 4 7-footers. And the craziest thing I think about the 76ers roster is how Ben Simmons really Ben Simmons and Robert Covington too. I think Covington is an underrated aspect of this. How their positional versatility really allows them to flex their length in large lineups or flex their playmaking and speed in small lineups where Simmons is the center and Covington can play the 4. It's nuts.
And it presents a huge mismatch on the other end of the floor because, you have those 2 guys, like you said, who can easily switch, guard 2s, 3s, 4s, and occasionally even 5s in switch situations comfortably. But now the defense on the other end of the floor has to say, are we going to put a big guy like Derek Favors on to guard Covington? And, that could be a sticky situation because he excels at back cuts. Even though he can't drive at all, doesn't have much acceleration, he can still, make timely cuts and just get open looks from 3, especially in transition before the big man can get back. So I definitely think they're putting a lot of stress on the opponents just with their starting lineup and the matchup problems that they present.
And I think it was pretty good coaching. It was pretty good, I guess, lineup management by Brown tonight, sort of exploiting the opportunities that they could. And really what made it all possible is when you look at this lineup, the starting lineup that I talked about earlier, Dario Saric, I think this year has not been very good, and he was hitting a shot tonight, so he had like 27 points or something like that. I think that was sort of hollow stats. They were leaving him wide open. He happened to hit them, whatever. But, I mean, defensively, more importantly, I just don't think he's very effective. He doesn't move his feet. He's not very fast. Richaun Holmes, of course, is a really pitiful defender. The rim protector out there, the help rim protector, the center out there was Ben Simmons, and he was really good at it. He was interrupting plays. He was getting blocks. He was stuffing people. And then Covington, too. Really, I mean, tonight, with Embiid out, there are 2 good players on the 76ers. And it's interesting. That, to me, makes me optimistic about where they're going developmentally because it's really clear that they're building around a core. And it's too bad that Markelle Fultz is bad or whatever is going on with Markelle Fultz. But the fact that basically tonight Covington and Simmons were so good that they carried everyone else, and Redick had a great game, too. I think it's actually makes me optimistic because everyone else, I think, on the 76ers, all of these young guys are too inexperienced to play well. And then you have guys like Jahlil Okafor who are not very good. And you've got older guys who are not particularly contributing very much, although their plus minus is high, which is, I don't know. It's hard to get a pulse on that. But do you sort of feel that about the 76ers, that their talent disparity is so loud? It's almost like they have remnants of the process 76ers, where like large swaths of their rotation are just really awful. But now they have these hyper elite talents at a few different positions.
Yeah, I think you definitely see that. But then you also see Brown is shrinking pretty much the amount of guys who get in the game. The past few years, you would see 12 guys getting in the game regularly. Now there's times where it's shrinking to 8 or 9. So I think he definitely is focusing on wins. He definitely wants the best players out on the floor, but like we saw tonight, Ja got a few minutes. It was brutal. TLC, he looks like he's coming along a little bit, so I'm not too worried about him, even though I've been very critical of him in the past.
I don't want to dig into him, but I'm not a big TLC believer.
Yeah, that I understand that completely. But he could probably serve a role as like a 9th or 10th man off a bench. Justin Anderson, he's a good energy guy, but once again, he's probably, going to contribute as much as like TLC. So I definitely do see that dichotomy between, the new young guns and the leftovers from the process, but there are good leftovers. I mean, Sam Hinkie, one of his philosophies was, let's get these young guys minutes who, maybe weren't the highest draft picks or didn't have the greatest pedigree and see if there's something there. Because normally those guys don't get the opportunity. We see it's materialized with Covington and TJ McConnell. Those guys would have never gotten, their fair shake in the NBA under normal circumstances. I mean, Covington was an analytics darling who got cut by the Rockets. McConnell, no one thought he would be an NBA player, and now these guys are contributing at a high level. So, there's definitely some process remnants that are still a valuable part of this team.
I think the theory is sound in the fact that their bench right now, like you said, Coach Brown, I think, is trying to win basketball games, but I think that Colangelo has done a really good job of straddling the line between, okay, it's time to take a step forward, and keeping a lot of these young guys who are in varying stages of developmental purgatory, like Justin Anderson, like TLC, even like Dario Saric, honestly, who they show flashes and maybe they round their game together. Maybe they fully actualize and sort of make good on their potential, but I think a lot of them probably won't. But it's worth a shot right now because really you're not contending for a championship, I think, this year.
Yeah, I think we all know we're about a 3 to 4 year outlook in terms of contending for a championship. So, a lot of those parts are going to dissolve over time and you're going to start to fill them in with more veteran presences. Hopefully we can vie for a superstar in the offseason because we're one of the few teams with cap space. And I think, that's part of the reason why we are trying to, really extract as many wins as possible out of the season. I mean, obviously you want to be competitive. You're developing your young guys, but you want to be, an appealing target for some of these free agents that are coming in. And, because the cap shrunk so much, now there's all these teams, like you're saying, cap purgatory. Everyone's going to be in the luxury tax. So, we really have a chance to kind of snipe a free agent. So it'll be interesting who we part with, and who we say is going to be part of our core for the future. Like, I wonder, like JJ Redick, he signed for 1 year, but he's clearly a really big part of our team just in terms of the gravity that he's allowed, to distract, help defense while Simmons and Embiid are running a pick and roll, giving them a lot more space. And then obviously being the best 3-point shooter we've ever had, that's a big part of the team that you can't just, lose cold turkey. So, I mean, we speculated in the offseason that they had a wink deal in place where he's going to take a pay cut and then get an extension over the next few years. But we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see whether JJ Redick is a long-term piece or whether he's a stand-in for a piece to come. One of my favorite things about watching the 76ers is just that they make so much sense. The theory of this team is so sound, especially if Marco Fultz wasn't like malfunctioning. It would make so much sense that you've got this guy in Ben Simmons who is a elite playmaker and a elite big man too. He's got a lot of really great big man skills that it takes a secondary playmaker like Marco Fultz to capitalize on, right? And then you've got Joel Embiid, because Ben Simmons' one flaw is that he doesn't really have a jump shot. You have Joel Embiid who can spread the floor, who can basically make it so that Ben Simmons can get to the basket and finish on a consistent basis. And I mean, tonight, actually, I did want to touch on this, and we'll round out this podcast at the end talking about their cap situation and talking about their future. But right now, I think on the court, for the first time in a long time, the 76ers are fascinating. So I think it's almost like doing the 76ers a disservice to focus too much on the future and not touch on some of the on-court play that we're seeing. So there was a stretch in the second quarter where the 76ers were shooting something like 15%. And if you look at some of the lineups they were playing, that wasn't super stunning. They had all that length and positional versatility. I think they were playing really good defense, but I think in their half-court offense, if they weren't getting out on the break, they couldn't generate open looks because I just think without Joel Embiid, their half-court offense is so dependent, and this is fine. I mean, this isn't so much a criticism as it is just a observation. Their half-court offense is so dependent on that 4-5 pick and roll between Simmons and Embiid. And I think that'll diversify in the future. But for right now, I mean, talk a little bit about what it looks like for the 76ers to run that 4-5 pick and roll and what happens to the opposing team's defense. They just whip out this nuclear weapon.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is the 4-5 pick and roll was oddly absent from the first 3 games. They just weren't running it. And I was obviously up in arms saying, what the heck is Brown doing? # fire Brett Brown, but then all of a sudden the script completely flipped and they were running it 4 or 5 times a game. And that's when, they started going on a win streak. Granted, it was against weaker opponents, but, I think opponents are still experimenting with how they want to guard this. And, it's probably an experiment that's going to last their entire careers because we know that Simmons is a walking matchup problem. He's extremely quick. We saw tonight there was at least 4 or 5 times where he would have had a breakaway dunk and they were just forced to foul him, which, that's kind of a LeBron-esque thing or Giannis-esque thing where they just get the ball and your only option is to foul them or else they're going to end up with a dunk on the other end of the floor. And then the thing with Embiid is he actually prefers the pick and pop. But I think, over time he'll start to develop as a role man, and that's just going to be so deadly because Simmons, he's generally going to have smaller defenders on him because they're the only ones quick enough to stay in front of him, which makes it so easy for him to just throw a touch pass right over the defense, and Embiid just really good at sealing off because he's so strong. That's probably the most underrated aspect of his game is his strength. And I just don't see a good option for the defense, if they can really diversify that pick and roll between even having Embiid run it with Simmons as the screener. They could get really funky with it. So I think, right now teams haven't figured out a good way to stop it. And I think they're going to continue to struggle, especially as these guys develop and, start to have, better synergy.
Yeah. And I think that the best available option is something that we've seen a lot for LeBron teams and something that we're starting to see with Giannis is just collapse the paint. Just, pull all your defenders from, not even focusing strong side, weak side, just everyone, all hands on deck, somehow affect the shot. And really in a way that we haven't seen since, I think, LeBron James. You've got Ben Simmons just hitting corner 3-point shooters right in the shooting pocket. And honestly, too, not even just corner shooters. He's had a lot of really good wraparound passes to guys out on the perimeter in less easy to reach places. It's been pretty fantastic. And part of the reason to think that JJ Redick might stick around is because he's a easily top 3 shooter in the league. And like you said, the best shooter that the 76ers have ever had. Robert Covington, has been putting him up at a fantastic rate this year. And that really is what makes sense with this team with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid and hypothetically Markelle Fultz is like a Shane Battier and a Ray Allen, just like the old Miami Heat teams.
Yeah, I actually think that's a fascinating analogy because in the preseason when we were trying to, dream up some of the offensive sets that Brett Brown might try to pull from history, we looked at those Heat teams because we did think the roster construction, was pretty similar to what we have here as far as the stars go. I actually did want to touch on one thing, though. we are on this 5-game win streak. We
Well,
came into
hold up. I think it also fits really well because Markelle Fultz and Norris Cole are very similar, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I get the Fultz D Wade comparison is not terrible. I mean, obviously, it sounds like you're down on Fultz. I'm neutral.
Hey, actually, hear this. I think the Ben Simmons D Wade comparison is better.
Ben Simmons, D Wade.
I mean, think about how D Wade would just ghost and sort of use his incredible explosiveness and speed to create spacing problems without a jump shot, right? Like just cutting to the basket at the perfect opportune times. And then, of course, in this situation, Joel Embiid is Chris Bosh. But I just really think that in an optimal world, you've got Markelle Fultz operating as the secondary playmaker and sort of really using Ben Simmons as this guy who can be cutting to the basket and creating from that high post area in a way that it's similar to like LeBron hitting D Wade off of those cuts.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all agree LeBron is, probably one of the better comps for Simmons, especially among.
It's more the spacing that I'm speaking in regards to, and that particular offensive capability to be able to create distortions in the defense despite lacking a jump shot.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is, I'm pretty sure D Wade, he obviously has been one of the worst 3-point shooters for guards like in NBA history, but oddly enough, players seem to guard him pretty dang tightly, off ball, and that's why he's made such a good living out of the back cuts. And that was kind of something that he started in this latter half of his career. So, I don't really think you're seeing that from Simmons. I think, they just want to try to clog the paint as much as possible, whoever's guarding him off ball. But that's why we've added in wrinkles like having him get a running start and we'll cycle the ball around to him. And then, by the time the sagging defender rotates over, he's already, has a full head of steam and he's by them. So, I think Brett Brown is showing as he's like opening up this playbook, he's handing the reins over to Simmons, and he's showing that he's more than we ever could have hoped for.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to bring up, because that's actually something that Eric Spoelstra used to do when Dwayne Wade was sort of used to catch up speed. They did that exact same action where it would be sort of like a handoff or like a pass back and forth, some interaction between Ray Allen and Dwayne Wade on the strong side, and then Dwayne Wade would sort of, off of that, get going towards the basket with some speed, and then whoever was helping would basically, hedge towards Ray Allen because he's the better shooter, and then allow Dwayne Wade to get that little bit of separation. So that's another thing that I think is actually pulled from, and it's not a 1-for-1 comparison. Like you said, Ben Simmons to LeBron is a natural comparison, but I mean, remember, like LeBron James at that point in his career was an elite jump shooter. So that would be more like, again, in theory, Markelle Fultz, then it would be Ben Simmons, and then Dwayne Wade would be a little bit more like Ben Simmons. It's not 1-for-1. And then, of course, I mean, the most talented player on the court, like, is probably Joel Embiid, not, Ben Simmons, who's LeBron James. As good as Ben Simmons has looked, I still think Joel Embiid is by far the player with the highest upside, which is insane to think about.
I don't know. I mean, if you asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have said, yeah, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think you're buying into the hype a little bit, man. Think about Joel Embiid last year in those 31 games. I mean, I understand right now. Go ahead.
Is Ben Simmons' ceiling not somewhere close to like a top 25 player all time?
I don't think it is in the same way that Joel Embiid is. Last year, if Joel Embiid had the season that he had in his rookie year, mind you, over the course of the entire season, it would have been one of the best seasons in NBA history because he was single-handedly carrying both the 76ers offense and then carrying the best defense in the league for the time that he was on the court. So like his rookie season, Joel Embiid, in the time that he was actually out there, was one of the best seasons in NBA history. And as great as Ben Simmons has been thus far, I just don't think that he is on that same level of production.
But I don't think we've seen anything like Simmons either. I mean, I've looked back and Magic Johnson is like the only guy with actually eerily similar stats in their age 21 seasons. So, I think they're both, historic seasons. And I'm not going to be the one to separate them. And one of the main reasons why is because what's the percent chance that Simmons makes it to 1,000 games played versus Embiid?
Oh, yeah. If you're thinking about the best case scenario for the 76ers, though, you're putting aside injuries, right? In this universe where both of these players are actualizing into superstars, you have to inherently disregard injuries as a factor, as a variable. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, Ben Simmons is going to be in more All-Star games, but I just think Joel Embiid, if one of them is going to win the MVP, it's going to be Joel Embiid.
Yeah, well, I just think another factor is being out on the floor makes you better. You know what I mean? And Embiid, he hasn't even
you
played
would think that, but then Joel Embiid just obliterated the league after sitting out for 3 years.
Yeah, so he's definitely an enigma. I don't even know. I don't even think I have a great read on him yet. We've seen him, improve leaps and bounds in a week in one skill and then completely lose another and then regain it again. So, my barometer is going crazy on Embiid. I mean, we obviously know he has this absurd amount of talent packed into, one of the most physically imposing bodies we've ever seen. So, in that sense, yeah, his ceiling's probably Hakeem with the 3-point shot and what can measure up to that. But I think Simmons also has a historically great, ceiling.
Yeah, I think the fact that Joel Embiid has easily demonstrated that he can be the best defender in the league. Like, he's demonstrated that really, if he's on the court, he's going to win probably multiple defensive player of the years, I guess. And then at the same time too, in the modern NBA, he has a jump shot and Ben Simmons doesn't. And I just think that ultimately, and plus, if you think a little bit about what defenses are going to look like in the playoffs, I think that Joel Embiid, in the same way that as great as Ben Simmons is, tonight he was pretty inefficient. He's been incredible, but he has not been like Joel Embiid, honestly, last year, efficient. Actually, Joel Embiid wasn't super efficient, except that he got to the free throw line and hit like 90% of his free throws. So I really do think that you have to give the nod to Joel Embiid because he's demonstrated that really last year he was the best defensive player in the league in his minutes. He absolutely was. He was better than Draymond Green, which is incredible. He was better than Rudy Gobert in every single rim protection category possible. And then he was single-handedly carrying the Sixers team with a really anemic offense. And you saw that as soon as he went with his knee injury, the 76ers were just not a good team. And they looked like they were bound for the playoffs. So, I mean, the reason I'm arguing this point, even though it seems like you're splitting hairs, or it seems like I'm splitting hairs rather, is because I really do think that Ben Simmons is in a very rare class of players that this guy is potentially like a 10-time All-Star. But Joel Embiid could be the best player in NBA history, Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. I just don't see that ceiling for Ben Simmons.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of convincing me, but at the same time, we shouldn't underrate Simmons' defense. And, I'm never going to be the one to compare the impact of a wing defender, versus center. But I think Simmons has the potential to be one of the best wing defenders in the NBA. Obviously when you take on a big toll of the offense, you're gonna suffer on defense. But so far we haven't seen that. His activity level has been terrific. He's been able to utilize his basketball IQ on both ends of the floor really effectively. So for me, the jury's still out. If you put a gun to my head, clearly, I think I would say Embiid. But I don't want to undersell. Well, what Simmons
do you remember
has done.
last year? Do you remember that Nylon Calculus article about wingspan correlating to defensive performance?
Yes.
Like 1 for 1. I mean, Ben Simmons has a shorter wingspan than his height, and I think that he would be an outlier if he were to be. I mean, I'm not saying that he can't be a good wing defender, but we're saying that. Not only is a wing defender instead of a rim protector, which can't have the same level of defensive impact, but also he would be a significant outlier in terms of he doesn't have this wingspan, this typical of the very best defenders in the league. So, I'll argue this point to the death because I just think that when I was looking at that 43.5 over under, basically, and I had Max Rappaport on and I talked about this, if you're betting the 43.5 over, you're saying that Joel Embiid is going to be healthy because if Joel Embiid is healthy, this is a better than 43.5 win team. It just is. And Ben Simmons could have come out and fractured his leg like Gordon Hayward in the first game of the season. And Joel Embiid has already demonstrated that he can carry a team to a 50-win rate. And then, of course, there were improvements across the roster. And I just don't think the same can be said about Ben Simmons. So, like, you know, again, it seems like I'm splitting hairs, but like, I do feel pretty strongly about it. But all that stuff aside, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is Markelle Fultz. So, to me, it's really frustrating because I think the argument for Ben Simmons is mostly your argument, I guess, like the argument that Ben Simmons is better than Joel Embiid. The two foundations of it are getting overhyped because of recency bias. And two, his incredible versatility. And with Markelle Fultz malfunctioning, there's half of Ben Simmons' game that is basically not on display because it really depends on a secondary playmaker guard for him to show off the big aspects of his game, like the big man aspects of his game that I think really make him like a standout prospect, you know?
Well, if we want to talk about small sample size, let's look at Embiid's entire career. I mean, even you're talking about...
No, I said recency bias.
Well, I'm just saying one of the biggest point differentials and having such a great on-off rating and the impact on the D, we played a lot of bad teams in the stretch that Embiid was playing. I mean, the best win we had the entire year was against the Raptors, and Embiid didn't even play like, you know, most of the fourth quarter in that game. Actually, Dario was like a really pivotal player in that game. So, you know, I think a little bit, you're getting a little bit of that supernova effect with Embiid, where it's just like he came in, he had 3 years to prepare, and he had, you know, the most incredible 30-game stretch we've ever seen for like a rookie. And look, I'm not saying Simmons is better. I'm pretty much saying the jury's still out, and a big part of that is just because the question marks about Embiid's health.
Well, yeah,
and also
I'm arguing for upside, by the way.
Yeah, well, I mean, also, I just like, I didn't, and there is a recency, yeah, there's always going to be a recency bias effect, but it's not like Ben Simmons is getting lucky. I mean, the things that he's showing, they're skills that are even only going to improve. He came in, his handle was a lot tighter than people expected. People expected he would be the league leading turnover guy. He's not doing that. You know, his jump shot clearly has a ways to go. I'm actually hoping he switches to right hand. But that's the funny thing. He's such a fundamentally flawed player, but he's producing like no rookie we've seen in 30 years, other than LeBron. So it's just like, I don't want to undersell what Simmons is able to do. And if he's able to remedy some of those fundamental issues, that's where I'm saying the ceiling, you know, really might match up with Embiid.
You're dodging the question. What's up with Markelle Fultz?
Okay, all right, we'll get back to Fultz. So the reason I didn't go right at that is because I don't really have much to say. I was a fan of the trade when they made it. I was a big fan of Fultz in college. I actually would like stream the 1 o'clock games over in Washington, and the arenas were empty. So I watched like 90% of his college games, and then everything that I missed after we drafted him. So, you know, it's clear what happened. He had a shoulder injury. He went to someone in his camp. They gave him some bad advice about, you know, changing his form to not hurt his shoulder. He can't do that effectively at all, so they shut him down. So basically now...
Man, I think that's really trivializing the situation to say that it's clear what happened. So, it was bizarre.
All right, so let's just hear your perspective on the whole thing.
Well, so I think one of the things that sticks out is that when there's media coverage of any given team, and I'm talking about when there was that video of him taking left-handed shots, there's only media present at practice for like 5 or 10 minutes out of, you know, the 2 hours that they're out there putting up jump shots. And the fact that he was out there showing this left-handed jump shot and sort of making jokes about it and not referencing his shoulder is incredibly bizarre. And that he was choosing to do that while there was media present too, that's a behavioral problem. And I don't mean like he's like a bad guy. I just mean like that's really weird. It's really weird behavior. The way that the entire thing was handled was really weird. both in terms of like what was coming from his trainer, and in terms of Marco Fultz giving dissonant information from one day to the next. Like, I think saying that it's a cut and dry situation, it's like, oh, well, clearly he has a shoulder problem. I mean, like, even if you grant that the primary factor at play is demonstrably his shoulder, I'm not going to say clearly his shoulder, but it's almost certainly his shoulder. There's still all of these surrounding variables that are really alarming. And I think that Sixers fans, if there aren't red flags in your head about this guy, and, there's the context of, Danny Ainge just being like, I want nothing to do with this. I'm going to trade him for the third pick in the draft and then this series of weird first round picks or whatever. Even that context is really eyebrow raising, and just ignoring all of that and just accepting it's like, oh, well, he is a shoulder thing. I think that's delusional. I think that helps you sleep at night, but I'm alarmed.
Well, I think under normal circumstances, I would be on your side of this. But the Sixers are an extremely enigmatic organization. You're right. Most teams, this would be major red flags. But they've become like a bastion for smoke screens, misinformation, BS press releases, weird interactions with media. So, I think we have become desensitized to it, and this is kind of just par for the course with Sixers culture, and that's actually what is giving me comfort, and that is actually what's letting me sleep at night. I don't think that I'm trying to convince myself of anything. I think we've just seen how it's played out with Simmons. We've seen how it's played out with Embiid. People had the same issues. They said Embiid's only going at 6-foot guys in the post when he's practicing. They said that Simmons, never shoots in public. And it's not that he's exhibited that he can shoot yet, but he does look like he's developing, some mid-range skills. So, I'm not worried about it. I actually think it's probably for the better that he shut down. I don't think he was
for sure.
Yeah, I don't like, regardless of the injury, I think there's this new philosophy where it's like bring guys along slow. And it works out. So I'm a fan of it. Even if he missed the whole year, I would have no problem with it as long as he's able to absorb as much info as possible and kind of just see what it takes to be a pro. Granted, he is like 19 years old, and then just work on some of his weaknesses, namely a shot. So I have no problem with it. I hope they are extremely cautious with it. I've already come to expect them to have a bunch of smoke screens with all their press releases, and I don't put any stock into that whatsoever. I think they're now in good hands because they hired a team doctor or physio guy from Real Madrid, I believe, one of the powerhouses in Europe. So, I think they have the right guys in place now to handle all that. And yet still, this was, I guess, horribly mishandled. Well, I think the optics with the Sixers it's always horribly mishandled, but then it kind of seems like now that we look back at it, everything is kind of like falling into place. So I don't have as much skepticism as I did 6 months ago, a year ago. And then, even once we flipped from Sam Hinkie to Colangelo. So, there's been, I'm kind of moving to the other side of the pond where I was on that same side being the naysayer, saying this isn't going to work. What's going on here? Embiid will never play, blah, blah, blah.
Okay, hold up. I think I misrepresented my argument. I think in all likelihood, you're right, and it's going to be fine. He was the first pick in the draft for a reason. To assign an arbitrary statistic to it, we'll say like 85% chance that he just goes on to have, probably 3 or 4 All-Star games and be the third fiddle on an incredible Sixers team. But I just think that there's this really significant 15% chance that there's something funny going on, that there's something really weird about the fact that a guy who was the number 1 overall pick because of his ability to shoot off the dribble, and that is the primary skill that he has, that was the reason for him being a number 1 pick, is that shooting off the dribble is pretty much right now, for a primary initiator, the most important skill in the game, and he came into training camp with a radically altered jump shot. Ignoring that 15% chance that, frankly, he could just be a terrible shooter for the rest of his career for some weird reason. I think that is that is something you have to keep in mind.
Before you go on, I just want to ask, has we ever seen an example of this kind of thing? I mean, I kind of feel like that would be unprecedented. A really highly touted pick who had a polished jumper in college came in with the injury, but then could never shoot the rest of his career. I just never seen it, so I don't know why I would assign a 15% chance of seeing something that's never happened in history.
The injury didn't just happen in a vacuum, right? It's some of the behavioral miscues that would be the biggest dynamics at play, right? And like, I agree. If he just has frozen shoulder or whatever it is that he was diagnosed with, it's probably going to be fine. But there have been catastrophic instances of the yips before. Basketball is a game that's based on confidence, and if his confidence is just shot, I mean, like, look at Andre Drummond, right? He shot like 30% from the free throw line. That's entirely mental. Also, by the way, Markelle Fultz, not an elite jump shooter in high school. His 1 year in college was sort of an outlier in that regard. A very convincing outlier, by the way. But there's a lot of suspicious stuff around it that if I pull it all together and I look at everything that's in play, I say there's a real non-zero chance that there's really something up with him as a prospect.
Well, would you say the same thing about Lonzo?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. Well, I mean, there is another side of this whole thing is saying the entire draft class is overblown and there might not be a single superstar in the whole lot. What do you think about that?
I think that's pretty unlikely.
So if you had to like take your guess of like maybe rank your top 3 of likelihood to become a superstar, who would it be?
A superstar?
Yeah.
Superstar. Are we saying like we'll use 5-time All-Star as...
We'll say top 10 player in the league at any time in their career.
I think Jonathan Isaac is probably number 1, and then Dennis Smith Jr. is number 2. Lonzo Ball is probably number 3, and then Markelle Fultz is probably number 4.
Okay.
And
I mean,
we're talking about top 10 player. If the question is what player is probably going to have the most All-Star games in a median universe, I'd probably say Tatum 1 and Markelle Fultz 2. I'm just saying that there's this outlier scenario where he's just a total bust. We have seen a guy, Jahlil Okafor, the 3rd pick in the draft, just be a really atrocious NBA player. And I'm just saying that that exists in a way that is not true of any other player in this draft, except for maybe Lonzo Ball, who might just be bad. It's weird.
Well, I think but Fultz was a completely different kind of prospect than Okafor. I mean, Okafor was like, we had slim pickings from, or a second pick after whatever LA was going to take. So if they took Okafor, we were taking Russell and vice versa. They didn't even really consider Porzingis at all. So in that sense, I really have my reservations. Like I said, I don't have nearly as much concern about Fultz as you do. I mean, Okafor, there's always more bust potential with the immobile big man. Especially as the NBA starts to become this more pace and space game.
Well, again, I'm saying this is a psychological thing. And I think that really the reason why Jahlil Okafor busted is psychological.
Well, I just think Fultz is a very even-keeled guy. We're acting like he was the worst player ever. He had a completely broken jump shot and was still playing better than Lonzo. So I'm not concerned, and then I think we should just have this conversation again, at the end of the season.
Again, I think that in all likelihood, he's going to be an all-star caliber player. So if that's what ends up happening, then, well, yeah, this was the most likely outcome. Anyways, let's go ahead and move on. We've actually gone down a few interesting thought experiment paths that I really enjoyed. Here's another one. When Kevin Durant said he was going to make a basketball decision in free agency and then ultimately went to the Warriors, that to me was the defining moment when we should have all realized, okay, he's going to the Warriors. Because if he wanted to win basketball games, the Warriors were the natural pick. So if LeBron James were to make a basketball decision, he would go to the 76ers.
Yeah, I don't know what to think because I know that rumor was picking up steam with Simmons like tweeting the eyes emoji at him in the offseason.
Well, I'm not speculating on the probability. I'm just saying that if LeBron James wants to win a championship, he goes to the 76ers.
Or what if he went with the Bucks? That would be a pretty crazy team.
I don't know, man. I think Ben Simmons, Covington at the 2, Joel Embiid, who I think is potentially Like Ben Simmons might be like a mini LeBron James. Joel Embiid might be the best player in NBA history. Markelle Fultz is probably going to be an all-star. Robert Covington is Robert Covington, right? And whoever plays at the 2, like it could be Air Bud.
So do you think the Sixers are a better supporting cast than the current Cavs?
Yeah. Oh, 500%.
So yeah. So if he wanted to, he would just trade his supporting cast right now for the current Sixers?
Yeah, 3,000%.
And he already says that he no longer has allegiance to Cleveland because he got him their title. So do you think it's a race between Philly and LA then?
I'm not sure how much Philly is even in the race as a probability. I'm just saying that if he wants to win a championship, he should go to an Eastern Conference team, probably, because he's going to continue to waltz to the finals. And then once you get to the finals, anything can happen. And we've got multiple players here on the 76ers that are probable all-stars and potentially a couple of the best players in NBA history. And like LeBron James cares a lot about his body, right? And I think he's going to age gracefully in that regard. If he wants to keep up his all-star caliber play, then he should really go to a team like the 76ers where he can be basically the player that your co-host thinks that Amir Johnson is, that he has this like incredible outsized impact on the court at any given moment that he's out there, where LeBron James is out there averaging like 15 points a game, 8 rebounds, 8 assists, and when he's on the court, the 76ers are like a 500 win team or something like that. It would be the perfect universe. If he wanted to actually go toe-to-toe with the Warriors, he would go to the 76ers. In all likelihood, I think he would choose the Lakers because of a whole bunch of reasons. But I'm saying if LeBron's number one priority is winning a championship, he goes to the 76ers.
And you don't think the Colangelos have been, sitting there with their feet kicked up, smoking some cigars, thinking about that? Like, I really genuinely feel like LeBron should be, capitalized and circled, in one of their off-season notebooks as that's our priority number one. We want to do whatever we can. We're going to leave no stone unturned.
Well, and remember when we were talking about like the best way to utilize Ben Simmons is with that secondary playmaker. Like imagine instead of Markelle Fultz, you had LeBron fucking James.
Yeah, I know. We would instantly be vaulted into a title contender. Like you're saying, he might be able to take some of the load off just because Simmons is kind of that poor man's version of him.
And Joel Embiid and Markelle Fultz, by the way.
Yeah, and the other thing is LeBron would certainly help their development. I mean, Simmons and him already have a connection. They both have the same agent. They spend a lot of time together. They train together. So, there might be something there. I don't want to, say anything because I do believe in the power of jinx. And if you're a Philly sports fan, you never think anything's good's gonna happen until it happens. We don't count our chickens before they hatch. But it is kind of cool to daydream about that and think that there's more than a 0% chance of it happening.
Well, yeah, and again, I'm not even speculating about the probability because I don't think that it's realistic to ever expect anyone to just be like, you should make your life decisions based on winning a game, right? Like, I don't think that LeBron's operating on that level. I think it's unrealistic, and because of that, the 76ers won't be number one on his list. But I'm just saying, in a hypothetical universe where LeBron's only factor is like, which of these routes puts me in best opportunity to potentially topple the Warriors, you have to go with the team with, again, potentially the best player of all time, right? With Joel Embiid. It would be very easy to see Ben Simmons developing into a top 10 player, like we've discussed. A probable all-star, although like Markelle Fultz in this universe is like the 4th best player on the court, or like the 5th best player, because I think Robert Covington's underrated. You have Robert Covington matched up with Klay Thompson. You have LeBron matched up with, I guess, Draymond Green. Ben Simmons on Kevin Durant is pretty compelling to me. And then you've got Joel Embiid, which is like the tried and true method for really shaking the Warriors at their core, is like a dominant big man. And you've got Joel Embiid.
Yeah. I think a lot of the Philly sports podcasts have, talked about how we're building ourselves to be Warriors killers. And I think, the free agency pool will have have big impact on our timeline, whether that's 2 years or more like 4 to 5. And obviously LeBron will have a big impact on that. But the Warriors, I don't think they necessarily deal with a dominant center. Going back to that LeBron thing, when has he ever played with a dominant center in his career? I mean, Bosh was kind of a converted power forward to a center. I mean, obviously he did the job well, but he's nothing like Embiid.
Hey, he played with Shaq.
Yeah. Shaq, 370-pound Shaq.
Right. And hey, are you trying to say that Ilgauskas isn't a dominant center? Yeah, no. And I think that would be the best supporting cast. 2 or 3 years, like a 34-year-old LeBron, who at this point is like a power forward, basically, he's like Charles Barkley at this point.
And he makes everyone else better. So you're not just getting Simmons and Embiid how they are. You're getting the Simmons and Embiid plus what LeBron adds to them. And we already know that he makes guys like 30 to 40% better than what they are for their career. So you kind of just start drooling at the thought of it. And I don't even want to keep talking about it because it's probably not realistic, but it depends on your definition exciting. Of realistic.
But whether that happens or not, I think that it's pretty impossible to be disappointed about how the 76ers team is looking like they're going to be going into the future. If I were to point at any team right now that isn't the Warriors and say 3 years from now, who's the most likely championship winner? Probably 4 years from now is more realistic. I would probably have the 76ers at the top of that list. Number one, besides the Warriors again. We touched on earlier, this 4-5 pick and roll over the entire course of Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid's career. It's going to be a nightmare for NBA teams to figure out. And I truly believe that. It's something that I've basically, from the minute Ben Simmons was drafted and paired up with Joel Embiid, I was like, this is going to be dominant. With those two guys and some of the assets they have collected, Markelle Fultz could totally whiff, and they're still championship contenders. And with Robert Covington too, again, Robert Covington to me is such an amazing fourth or fifth starter on a championship team. A potentially low usage guy who is one of the best defenders in the league. I think a maybe all NBA fifth team defender, something like that. He slides in perfectly as a role player, hopefully next to Markelle Fultz as the superstar, but you have all this cap space available. It could be LeBron James. Truly, Markelle Fultz could just be Johnny Flynn, and it might not even matter. So I'm incredibly optimistic about the 76ers going forward. I think that this is, in all likelihood, going to be an incredible team. I think that that's their developmental trajectory. And regardless of some of the pitfalls that they could potentially fall in, they're just so protected by this bubble of two generational players in all likelihood that synergize, I think, incredibly well.
Yeah, you've now compared Fultz to a number 3 pick who is fizzling out of the league and a number 7 pick who fizzled out of the league. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that he was the number 1 pick in a draft that was considered to be loaded. Dude, it's kind of hasty.
I think in all likelihood, he's going to be like CJ McCollum, right? That is the most probable outcome. It's something like that. Or a 90 2K rating version of Lou Williams or something, right? Except he has the chase down blocks badge or whatever the fuck, right? So that's probably what will happen.
How about a prime Brandon Roy?
I would need to think about that a little bit more, but I get where you're coming from. I definitely get with the stop-start stuff. That's sort of, you get the James Harden comparison a lot. I think the Brandon Roy thing makes some sense. Although if I was the 76ers, I wouldn't want to compare anyone to someone with some of the long-term injuries that Brandon Roy, if you believe in jinxing, I wouldn't compare anyone to Brandon Roy. And then, hey, Joel Embiid could be like Greg Oden, right?
I'm not even going to entertain that.
Eric, thanks for joining me. For all you listeners out there, make sure you subscribe to Sixers Science. They get a lot further into the weeds as far as analytics and numbers. They have a really fascinating stat. The kid factor? Or the
kid score.
Right, kid score. And I'm not even going to tell the listeners what that means, but it's a original stat, right? That's derived from your podcast.
It explains why Ben Simmons might be in that Hall of Fame consideration. So you'll have to go take a listen to that podcast and let us know what you think.
Yeah, and you can find them at almightyballer.com/SixerScience. You can find them on iTunes, Stitcher, everywhere where podcasts are found. Check out the rest of the Almighty Baller Network. We've got a lot of great podcasts going. Whatever your favorite team is, whether that's the Sixers, the Orlando Magic, who I think are equally promising, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, actually, I do work for B-Ball Breakdown, and we just released a video about Aaron Gordon that everyone should go check out because this guy is probably already putting his name in the hat for most improved.
Don't you think Kristaps has that on lock?
Yeah, probably. But we gotta plug Aaron Gordon for a little bit, though.
Hey, by the way, the B-Ball Breakdown website looks really good. Did you guys recently have a redesign?
Yeah, I mean, we've probably been in about a year recovery process from having like this big security meltdown. So, we've been working our way back, but I think, we're up and running, and we're going to continue to develop the website, and we're going to have a lot new
Wait, Eric,
products.
Did you know that I redesigned the website?
Really?
Yeah, that was me.
No.
It looks totally different now, right?
I had no idea.
Oh, go pull up B-Ball Breakdown, man.
Wait, when did this go live?
Week and a half ago, maybe? Doesn't it look good, though?
Wow, way better than it did.
Right. Yeah. That was all me.
Nice. Yeah, we're gonna keep like building new things into it because I want to add e-commerce platform so we can start selling our like coaching clinics out of there and then do like more skills videos.
I did
and
a great
stuff.
job.
I like it a lot.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. We can wrap up the podcast. So again, follow at Sixer Science.
Yep. Yeah. Sixerscience.com. You can also find all our podcasts there. 1S or 2 in the middle. It doesn't matter. And like he said, at Sixer Science on Twitter. Shoot me any questions you may have about the Sixers, and I'll try to get the answer to you. And if I don't know it, I'm pretty sure I know someone who does.
All right, awesome. Thanks a lot, and thanks everyone out there for listening. Tune in next time. I don't know what we're going to be talking about, but I'm sure it's going to be great. Episode over.
Hi, it's me, that little voice inside your head. You spent all year taking care of business. Let Office Depot Office Max take care of you. There's this new HP Pavilion laptop with 8th generation Intel Core i5 processor. Save $200. Now just $449. Look at it. It's only $449 at Office Depot Office Max. Go ahead. You deserve it.
Taking care of business.
Offer ends 11/11. Limit 1.